The early fall wind carried a biting chill as I stepped through the glass doors of Pinnacle Industries for what I'd been told would be the last time. 25 years of loyalty ended with a 30-minute meeting and a cardboard box of personal belongings. I'm Martha Donovan, Marty to everyone who knows me. And at 59 years old, I never expected to be starting over. But that day, watching the security guard escort me out like a criminal, I made a promise to myself. This wasn't the end of my story. What my boss of 2 decades didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd been quietly making moves behind the scenes. While they saw a grandmother counting down to retirement, I was counting up assets and waiting for the perfect moment. When Richard Bennett fired me that Thursday afternoon, he had no idea he'd just handed the company to the woman he thought he'd discarded. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning began like any other in my 25 years at Pinnacle Industries. I arrived at 7:15 a.m. sharp, 45 minutes before the executive floor officially came to life. The security guard, Tom, greeted me with his usual nod as I swiped my badge. "Morning, Mrs. Donovan. Beating the sunrise again?" I smiled, adjusting my pearl earrings, a gift from my late husband, James. "Someone's got to keep this place running, Tom." The ritual was comforting. Early arrival, prepping the conference room for the 9 a.m. board meeting, brewing the first pot of coffee, precisely the way Richard liked it. Not too strong, not too weak. After a quarter-century as executive assistant to the CEO, I knew his preferences better than he did. My desk sat just outside Richard Bennett's corner office, positioned so I could intercept anyone approaching his door. Today, a sticky note on my monitor reminded me to confirm his dinner reservation at Ellington's. Table 14, away from the kitchen. Extra bourbon for his old-fashioned. The small details that kept the machinery of his life running smoothly. At 8:30, I heard the familiar ding of the elevator. Richard's leather shoes squeaked against the marble flooring as he approached. "Good morning, Marty," he said without looking up from his phone. His silver hair was freshly cut, his navy suit impeccably tailored. At 62, Richard Bennett still commanded attention when he entered a room. "Morning, Richard. Your coffee's on your desk." The Chicago team sent over the quarterly projections. I've highlighted the discrepancies. And Mr. Westfield called about moving Friday's lunch to next week. He nodded absently. Whatever works for his schedule. I'd already rearranged his calendar. Of course. By noon, the board meeting had concluded, and I was finalizing Richard's travel arrangements for next month's conference in Boston when Diane from HR appeared at my desk. Her expression was tight, professional, but her eyes darted away when I looked up. "Marty?" she said softly. "Do you have a moment? Richard would like to see you in his office." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. HR doesn't escort you to a routine meeting with your boss of 25 years. Richard was standing behind his desk when I entered, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Minneapolis skyline. Diane quietly closed the door behind me. "Please, sit down, Marty," he said, still facing the window. The leather chair felt suddenly cold beneath me. On his desk, I noticed a folder I hadn't prepared, red with the HR stamp. "As you know," Richard began, finally turning to face me, "Pinnacle has been undergoing significant changes. The new digital initiatives, the restructuring." I nodded. I'd typed up the memos myself, scheduled the strategy meetings. "We're moving in a direction that requires fresh perspectives." He cleared his throat. "Younger talent with specialized skills." The realization settled like ice in my chest. I'd seen this playbook before. I'd just never imagined I'd be on the receiving end. "You're letting me go," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Richard looked momentarily taken aback by my directness. "We're eliminating your position. Technology has made traditional executive assistants less essential, but your service has been valued, which is why we're offering a severance package. Diane slid the red folder toward me. It's 3 months' pay plus continuation of health benefits through the end of the year, she explained gently. 3 months, for 25 years. I didn't open the folder. We'll need your badge and company phone, Richard continued. Not quite. Meeting my eyes. Security will help you collect your personal items. 25 years of dedication dismissed in less than 5 minutes. When does this take effect? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Immediately, Richard replied, glancing at his watch. Cynthia Miller starts tomorrow. She's from that digital talent agency. Very impressive background in social media and tech integration. I think you'll find the transition. I won't be here for any transition, I reminded him quietly. His expression flickered. Perhaps the first moment he'd truly considered the practicalities. Who would know where the contracts were filed? Who would remember how the Japanese clients preferred to be addressed? Who would know that Mr. Westfield was allergic to shellfish but too proud to mention it? Not his problem anymore, apparently. I stood, smoothing my charcoal skirt. I assume Jennifer will be taking over my immediate responsibilities. Richard nodded, relieved I wasn't making a scene. Yes, temporarily. She's been briefed. Jennifer was 26 and had been with the company for 8 months. She still asked me where the supply closet was. I placed my badge and phone on his desk. Good luck, Richard. I hope the future brings exactly what you deserve. He smiled slightly, mistaking my words for gracious acceptance. You've been an asset to Pinnacle, Marty. This is purely business. It always is, I replied. The walk back to my desk felt surreal. Through the glass walls, I could see curious faces watching as Diane hovered nearby. I took my family photos, my daughter Stephanie's wedding picture, my 3 grandchildren's school portraits, and tucked them into a cardboard box a security guard had brought up. My ceramic mug from the Grand Canyon trip James and I had taken for our 30th anniversary. The emergency sweater I kept on the back of my chair, 25 years, packed away in under 10 minutes. Tom, the security guard who had greeted me that morning, now stood awkwardly at the elevator. I'm sorry about this, Mrs. Donovan, he whispered, as we stepped inside. It's not right what they're doing. I gave him a small smile. Thank you, Tom. It's been nice seeing your face every morning. The parking garage was nearly empty at 1:30 p.m. I placed the box in my trunk and sat behind the wheel of my sensible Volvo, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I reached for my personal phone and dialed a number I'd memorized months ago. Lawrence Pierce's office, a crisp voice answered. This is Martha Donovan. I need to speak with Mr. Pierce immediately. I'm sorry, Ms. Donovan, but Mr. Pierce is in meetings all— Tell him it's regarding Pinnacle Industries. He'll want to take my call. There was a pause, then. One moment, please. Lawrence's voice came through seconds later. Marty? Is everything all right? It's happening, I said simply. Bennett let me go today, earlier than we anticipated. The line went quiet for a moment. Are you okay? I'm angry, I admitted, my voice finally cracking. 25 years, Lawrence. I gave that company everything. And now you'll take it back, he replied steadily. The board meets next week. Nothing's changed in our plan except the timeline. They've hired my replacement already, some young digital expert. Lawrence chuckled. That won't matter much when the ownership changes, will it? For the first time since sitting in Richard's office, I felt the knot in my chest loosen slightly. No, I suppose it won't. Come to my office tomorrow at 9. We'll finalize the details. He paused. Marty, you've been preparing for this possibility for months. Trust the work we've done. After hanging up, I sat in my car for several more minutes, collecting myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. How was your day, Mom? I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. My day? My day had been the end of one life, and, if Lawrence was right, the beginning of another. The drive home took me past familiar landmarks. The bakery where I picked up birthday cakes for office celebrations. The dry cleaner who knew exactly how Richard liked his shirts pressed. The coffee shop where I grabbed his afternoon espresso. Little errands that had structured my existence for decades. My house was quiet when I arrived, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the living room. I set the cardboard box down on the kitchen counter and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Fired. At 59. Too young to retire comfortably, too old to easily find another position. At least that's what Richard assumed. What he didn't know, what no one at Pinnacle knew, was that Martha Donovan had spent the last 3 years quietly purchasing company, stock through a series of private holding companies. What began as a retirement strategy had evolved into something far more substantial when I overheard Richard discussing a potential sale to overseas investors last year, investors who planned to strip the company and dissolve the American operations. 2. 130 employees would lose their jobs, including me. So I'd made some calls, liquidated some assets, and taken meetings on my lunch breaks. I'd leveraged my life insurance payout from James's death and the college fund money that remained after Stephanie finished school. I'd studied financial reports I wasn't supposed to see and board minutes I wasn't supposed to remember. And with Lawrence Pierce's help, I now controlled 38% of Pinnacle Industries stock, not enough for outright control, but more than any other single shareholder, including Richard Bennett himself. Next week, when Lawrence revealed my position to the board and proposed the counteroffer we'd prepared, Richard would discover that the grandmother he'd dismissed had become his boss. The irony of it made me smile through my tears as I finally broke down at my kitchen table, the cardboard box of memories sitting beside me, silent witness to the end of one chapter and the unexpected beginning of another. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. That night, sleep eluded me. I paced the hardwood floors of the home James and I had purchased 30 years ago, when our dreams were simpler, when security meant a steady paycheck and a modest pension. The grandfather clock in the hallway, another relic from a different time, chimed 3 a.m. as I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by financial statements and legal documents. The severance package folder remained unopened on the counter. 3 months' pay for 25 years felt less like compensation and more like a final insult. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and pulled out my personal laptop. The screen illuminated my face in the dark kitchen as I logged into an email account Richard Bennett had no knowledge of, the one I'd been using to communicate with Lawrence Pierce and his team for the past 15 months. Lawrence had been James's college roommate, now a partner at Blackwell & Pierce, one of Minneapolis's most prestigious corporate law firms. When I first approached him with my suspicions about Pinnacle's future, he'd been skeptical. Not of the information. He knew I had unparalleled access to Richard's dealings, but of my proposed solution. "Marty," he'd said over lunch at a small bistro far from the financial district, "what you're suggesting would require significant capital and risk. Are you certain this is the path you want to take?" I remember stirring my soup, considering his question. "I've spent my entire adult life building someone else's dream, Lawrence. I've watched Richard make reckless decisions that endangered people's livelihoods. If Pinnacle goes to those Korean investors, 200 families lose their income. I can stop that. I have to try." Now, 15 months later, our plan was on the precipice of completion. I reviewed Lawrence's latest email, a detailed breakdown of tomorrow's meeting agenda, and the final paperwork I'd need to sign. By this time next week, my position as Pinnacle's largest individual shareholder would be public knowledge. As dawn broke over the Minneapolis skyline, I finally closed my laptop. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. "Coming over for breakfast before work. Need to talk to you." I smiled despite my exhaustion. My daughter had an uncanny sense for when I needed company. Stephanie arrived at 7, letting herself in, with her key. At 35, she was the mirror image of me at her age. Practical, determined, with the same auburn hair now streaked with premature silver at the temples. She balanced a box of pastries in one hand and her travel mug in the other. "Mom," she called, "you look terrible. Did you sleep at all?" I accepted the bear claw she offered. "Not really. I have news." Her expression shifted immediately. "What happened?" "Richard let me go yesterday, eliminated my position. I kept my voice matter of fact, not wanting to worry her." "He what?" Stephanie slammed her mug down. "After 25 years? That ungrateful—" "It's fine," I interrupted, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "Actually, it might be for the best." Ina stared at me, confused. "Mom, you loved that job. You've dedicated your life to Pinnacle. How can this possibly be for the best?" I hesitated. For over a year, I'd kept my financial maneuvers secret from everyone, including my daughter. It wasn't just about security, it was about plausible deniability. If anything went wrong, I didn't want Stephanie implicated. But now, standing in my kitchen with anger burning in her eyes on my behalf, I realized I needed her to understand. "Sit down, sweetheart. There's something I haven't told you." Over the next half hour, I explained everything. The overheard conversations about selling to foreign investors, my suspicions confirmed through document access, the quiet stock acquisitions. Through shell companies Lawrence had helped me establish. Stephanie's expression morphed from confusion to disbelief to something approaching awe. "Mom," she whispered when I finished, "do you realize what you've done? What are you going to do?" I nodded. "I'm taking back control of a company that's been mismanaged for years. I'm saving jobs." "You're becoming Richard Bennett's boss," she clarified, a slow smile spreading across her face. "After he fired you." When she put it that way, I couldn't help but laugh. A real laugh, the first since yesterday's devastating meeting. "I suppose that is the most satisfying part," I admitted. "But Stephanie, this stays between us. I'm meeting with Lawrence today to finalize everything, and next week the board will be informed. Until then, my lips are sealed," she promised, reaching for my hand. "But Mom, I have to ask, how did you afford this? Pinnacle is worth millions." I squeezed her fingers. "Your father's life insurance, my retirement savings, the money from downsizing after your father passed, and—" I hesitated. "I've been making small investments for decades, Stephanie. Watching the markets. Learning. After your father died, I had to understand money in a way I never had before." She nodded slowly. "I always wondered why you stayed at Pinnacle when other companies would have paid you more. You could have been an executive somewhere else years ago." "I stayed because I believed in what we were building," I said simply, "and now I'm going to save it." After Stephanie left for her job at the University Medical Center, I showered and dressed with unusual care. The charcoal pantsuit I selected was one I reserved for Pinnacle's most important board meetings, perfectly tailored with a subtle silver pinstripe. My power suit, as James used to tease. Today, it felt appropriate. Lawrence's office occupied the 32nd floor of the Blackwell Tower, with views of the Mississippi River and downtown Minneapolis. His assistant, recognizing me immediately, ushered me into a conference room where Lawrence waited with 2 other men. "Marty," Lawrence greeted me warmly, taking both my hands. "Allow me to introduce Matthew Harding, our financial specialist, and Daniel Rosenthal, our corporate restructuring expert." I shook hands with both men, noting their curious expressions. I was used to it, the subtle surprise when people realized the unassuming grandmother before them was orchestrating a corporate takeover. "Gentlemen," I said, setting my briefcase on the polished table, "shall we begin?" For the next 3 hours, we reviewed every detail of our strategy, the holding companies through which I'd purchased Pinnacle stock, the timeline for approaching key board members before the official announcement. The press statement Lawrence had drafted. "We've confirmed that Richard only holds 12% of outstanding shares," Matthew explained, sliding a chart across the table. "With your 38%, plus the support we've already secured from the Turner family's 9%, we have effective control." Lawrence nodded. "The board meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday. We'll make our move then. Richard won't see it coming." "What about this digital expert he's hired?" Daniel asked, reviewing his notes. "Cynthia Miller?" I considered this. "She's irrelevant to our strategy. Once we take control, we can evaluate her position like any other." Lawrence chuckled. Spoken like a true CEO. I looked up sharply. "I'm not planning to run Pinnacle myself. That's not the objective, isn't it?" Lawrence leaned forward. "Marty, you know this company better than anyone. You've been the shadow executive for 25 years. Who better to lead it through this transition?" "I'm 59, Lawrence. I'm a grandmother who's spent her career as an assistant." "You're a strategist who's been hiding in plain sight," he countered. "Think about it at least. In the meantime, we proceed as planned." As I left Lawrence's office that afternoon, the magnitude of what we were undertaking finally hit me. This wasn't just about revenge against Richard Bennett, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction that aspect brought. This was about preserving a company I'd helped build, protecting jobs I knew were held by real people with families and mortgages and dreams. My phone rang as I reached my car. An unfamiliar number. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Marty? It's Jennifer, the young woman who was supposedly taking over my responsibilities at Pinnacle. I hope it's okay that I called you. I got your number from the company directory before they, deleted your profile." Her voice was strained, nervous. I softened my tone. "What can I help you with, Jennifer?" "Everything's a mess," she blurted out. "Richard is demanding reports. I can't find client information that wasn't in any of the transition documents. The Johnson account is up for renewal and no one knows the contact person. The Tokyo office keeps calling about some agreement you negotiated." I closed my eyes, feeling a flicker of vindication. Of course, things were falling apart. Richard had eliminated the one person who held all the institutional knowledge, who remembered every handshake agreement and personal preference of clients cultivated over decades. "I can't help you, Jennifer," I said gently. "I'm no longer an employee of Pinnacle Industries." I know, she rushed on. "But Richard is furious. He's been shouting at everyone. He even threw his phone this morning. He's saying you sabotaged him by not documenting procedures properly." That made me laugh. "I documented everything meticulously for 25 years. There are procedure manuals in the shared drive, client dossiers in the cabinet behind my old desk, and contact information in the Rolodex I was never allowed to digitize because Richard insisted on keeping it old school." "Oh," Jennifer sounded, relieved. "I'll look for those right away. Thank you, Marty. And I'm sorry about what happened. It wasn't right." After we hung up, I sat in my car for several minutes, thinking about the chaos unfolding at Pinnacle. Part of me, a small, vindictive part I rarely acknowledged, was pleased. Let Richard flounder. Let him realize, too late, what he'd thrown away. But the larger part, the part that had devoted decades to building something meaningful, felt a pang of genuine concern for the company and its employees. They shouldn't suffer because of Richard's poor decisions. In 5 days, I would walk back into Pinnacle Industries, not as Martha Donovan, executive assistant, but as the company's largest shareholder. In 5 days, everything would change. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and nervous energy. By Friday afternoon, unexpected exhaustion hit me as the adrenaline that had carried me through the week began to fade. I found myself sitting on my back porch, watching golden leaves spiral down from the maple tree James had planted. When we first moved in, my phone buzzed with a text from my oldest grandchild, 12-year-old Emma. Sleepover at Grandma's tonight? Mom says it's okay if you're not busy. I smiled. Stephanie likely sensed I needed the distraction and had put Emma up to asking. My daughter knew me too well. Love to, I texted back. Pizza. And movies? Be here at 6. The prospect of Emma's company lifted my spirits. While I couldn't share the full scope of what was happening with my grandchildren, their presence always grounded me in what truly mattered. I was setting up the guest room when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Richard Bennett's Mercedes parked at the curb. My heart stuttered. "Marty," Richard greeted when I opened the door, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "May I come in?" Wordlessly, I stepped aside. In all my years working for him, Richard had never once visited my home. Now here he was, looking strangely out of place in my living room with its comfortable furniture and family photos. "Can I offer you something to drink?" I asked, falling into the hostess role out of a long habit. "No, thank you." He remained standing, hands in his pockets. "I'll be brief. Things at the office have been challenging since your departure." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Jennifer is trying, but she lacks your institutional knowledge. Several clients have expressed concern about the transition." He cleared his throat. "I'm prepared to offer you a consulting position, 3 months at your previous salary, to help smooth things over." The audacity was breathtaking. Fire me unceremoniously, then expect me to return to clean up the mess. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," I said calmly. "I've already made other arrangements." Richard frowned. "What arrangements? Surely you haven't found another position so quickly." "Not employment," I clarified. "But I've begun restructuring my life post-Pinnacle. My schedule is full." "Marty," he said, switching to the cajoling tone he used when trying to persuade difficult clients, "be reasonable. This benefits us both. You'd have income while you search for your next opportunity, and we'd have your expertise during this transition." "What would Jennifer do?" I asked pointedly. "The digital expert you couldn't wait to bring on board?" He waved dismissively. "She'll focus on her modernization initiatives. This is about the day-to-day operations you managed. So I'd train her to replace me." Again. Richard sighed with poorly concealed impatience. "This is business, Marty. Not personal." "You're right," I agreed, moving toward the door. "And my answer remains no." His expression hardened. "I'm offering you a lifeline here. At your age, with your skill set, you must realize the job market will be challenging." I opened the front door. "Thank you for your concern, Richard. I'll manage." After he left, I leaned against the closed door, my heart racing. Richard Bennett, who had built his reputation on reading people and anticipating business moves, had no idea what was coming. His visit wasn't about helping me. It was about saving himself from the chaos my absence had created. And in 4 days, he would discover just how thoroughly he had underestimated Martha Donovan. Emma arrived at 6 with her backpack and a drawing she'd made for my refrigerator, a colorful depiction of us baking cookies together. "Mom says you're not working at your office anymore," she said as we arranged her artwork with a magnet. "Did you retire like Mrs. Peterson next door?" "Not exactly," I answered, measuring out flour for our pizza dough. "Sometimes changes happen that we don't expect, but they can lead to new opportunities." Emma nodded solemnly. "Like when I had to change schools last year and I was sad, but then I met Lily and now she's my best friend." "Exactly like that, sweetheart." We spent the evening making homemade pizza and watching animated films, Emma nestled against my side on the sofa. Her uncomplicated presence was healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. After she fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing the documents Lawrence had sent over. The stack of papers detailed the legal framework of my position, contingency plans for various board reactions, and talking points for Tuesday's meeting. I'd just finished signing the last form when my phone rang. "Lawrence, we may have a problem," he said without preamble. Richard's been making calls to board members. Marcus Stevens reached out to me. Apparently, Bennett's spinning a story about restructuring concerns and seeking support for some new initiative he's planning to announce Tuesday. "Do you think he knows? About our plan?" "No," Lawrence sounded certain. "This is something else, but it could complicate matters if he's rallying support for his own agenda. We need to make some preemptive calls this weekend. Can you meet tomorrow? Say noon at my office?" After agreeing, I tried to sleep but found myself staring at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing what I would say to the board members. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and went downstairs, careful not to wake Emma. In my home office, I pulled out a leather-bound notebook I'd kept for years, a record of observations, conversations, and insights about Pinnacle's operations. Not a diary exactly, but a professional companion that had helped me track the company's evolution through Richard's leadership. I flipped through the pages, noting patterns of decision-making, successes and failures, opportunities missed. This chronicle, combined with my front-row seat to every executive meeting for 25 years, gave me a perspective no outside consultant could match. If Richard was planning something for Tuesday's meeting, it wouldn't be entirely new. He recycled ideas, repackaging old concepts with fresh terminology, and I had documented it all. By dawn, I'd identified 3 likely scenarios based on Richard's recent interests and the current market conditions. I drafted responses for each, then quietly made coffee as Emma began stirring upstairs. After breakfast, and seeing Emma off with Stephanie, who came to collect her for soccer practice, I dressed for my meeting with Lawrence. The weather had turned sharply colder overnight, with a biting wind that hinted at winter's approach. Lawrence's office was quiet on Saturday, just a skeleton weekend staff manning the reception desk. In the conference room, he had assembled a small team, including Matthew from our previous meeting and a woman I hadn't met before. "Marty, this is Elaine Wilcox," Lawrence introduced. "She's our PR specialist, here to help craft our communications strategy." Elaine shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Donovan, it's a pleasure. I've been briefed on your situation. Very impressive maneuvering." "Thank you," I said, setting down my notebook. "I've been considering Richard's possible announcements for Tuesday. I think we need to be prepared for several scenarios." Over the next 3 hours, we refined our approach. Lawrence made calls to several board members, carefully framing the conversation around concerns about company stability rather than revealing our full hand. "Marcus is definitely intrigued," he reported after one such call. "He's had his own concerns about Richard's leadership for some time. The Turner family is still firmly with us. That puts us at 47% support before we even enter the room." "What about Helen Bradshaw?" I asked. Helen was our most recent board addition, a venture capitalist with significant tech industry connections. "She's the wild card," Lawrence admitted. "No clear allegiance yet. She'll likely vote with whoever makes the most compelling case Tuesday." "I've worked with Helen on the charity committee," I noted. "She values authenticity and transparency. I can reach out to her personally." Elaine looked up sharply. "That could be risky. If she alerts Richard, she won't," I said with confidence. "Helen appreciates directness. I'll be straight with her, just not reveal everything." Lawrence nodded slowly. "It's your call, Marty. You know these people better than we do." By late afternoon, our strategy was set. I would contact Helen on Sunday, we would finalize documents on Monday, and Tuesday would be the culmination of 15 months of careful planning. As I left Lawrence's office, wet snow had begun to fall, too early for the season but fitting for the momentous week ahead. I pulled my coat tighter, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. My phone rang as I reached my car. Jennifer again. "Marty, I'm so sorry to bother you on the weekend," she began, her voice strained. "But there's an issue with the Peterson contract." Richard insists you had negotiated special terms, but there's nothing in the file, and they're threatening to pull their business if we can't honor the agreement. I leaned against my car, watching snowflakes melt on the windshield. The Peterson account was worth millions to Pinnacle, one of our oldest and most loyal clients. The agreement was verbal, I explained, against my better judgment. Mr. Peterson's father founded the company with a handshake deal philosophy. The current Mr. Peterson maintains that tradition. The terms are standard plus a 3% legacy discount in honor of the founding relationship. It's applied manually each quarter. Oh, thank God, Jennifer breathed. Richard's been impossible all day. The financial team couldn't find any record of this arrangement. It's documented in my... I stopped myself. In the leather binder kept in the bottom right drawer of my desk. If it's still there, I'll check right away. Thank you, Marty. I know you don't owe us anything, but you've saved us from a disaster. After hanging up, I sat in my car contemplating the call. Part of me wanted to let Richard flounder, to lose the Peterson account through his own arrogance and carelessness. But the larger part, the part that had nurtured Pinnacle for 25 years, couldn't stand by while the company suffered. In a few days, Richard would learn that Pinnacle was no longer his to mismanage. But until then, I would continue to protect what I had helped build, even from a distance. Driving home through the early snowfall, I mentally prepared for my conversation with Helen tomorrow and the confrontation that loomed on Tuesday. After 25 years in the background, I was about to step into the spotlight, and Richard Bennett had no idea what was coming. Sunday dawned clear and cold, the overnight snow creating a thin white blanket across my yard. I sat at my dining room table, cradling a mug of coffee as I stared at Helen Bradshaw's contact information on my phone. The call ahead would be delicate, revealing enough to intrigue her without showing our full hand. At precisely 10 a.m., I made the call. Helen answered on the third ring. "Martha Donovan," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I heard about your departure. Unfortunate situation." "Thank you, Helen. I was hoping we might meet today. There's a matter regarding Pinnacle I'd like to discuss before Tuesday's board meeting." A pause. "You're no longer with the company, yet you're concerned about a board meeting?" "My circumstances have changed," I said carefully. "I believe you'll find what I have to share quite relevant to Pinnacle's future and your investment." Another silence then. "The Riverside Cafe at noon. I can give you 30 minutes. The Riverside Cafe was a small establishment overlooking the Mississippi, known for its discretion among business executives. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a view of both the entrance and the water. Helen arrived precisely at noon, elegant in a navy pantsuit with a crimson scarf at her throat. At 53, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had broken through multiple glass ceilings. "Marty," she greeted, sitting across from me. "I must say, this is intriguing. What could possibly be so important that a recently terminated executive assistant needs to discuss Pinnacle board business?" I met her gaze steadily. "Before we begin, I should clarify that while I've always been introduced as Richard's assistant, my actual role encompassed much more. I've essentially functioned as Pinnacle's COO without the title or compensation for over a decade." Helen's eyebrow arched slightly. "Most women in business have similar stories, mine included." She glanced at her watch. 28 minutes. "Remaining, Marty." I smiled at her directness. This was why I'd always respected Helen. I'll be concise. Richard is planning to announce a major company restructuring on Tuesday that would effectively dismantle Pinnacle's core operations. He's been in talks with Daewin Enterprises about selling our manufacturing division at a significant undervaluation. Helen's expression remained neutral, but her fingers tightened slightly around her water glass. That would require board approval, which is why he's been calling members individually, building support. The deal would generate a short-term stock bump, but devastate the company's long-term prospects. 200 jobs lost, minimum. And you know how? Documentation, I said simply. Richard isn't as careful with sensitive information as he should be, especially around someone he considers furniture rather than personnel. Helen leaned back, studying me. Assuming this is accurate, why tell me? What's your stake now that you've been let go? This was the moment of calculated risk Lawrence and I had discussed. I reached into my purse and withdrew a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table. This is a confidential ownership disclosure. I trust your discretion. Helen unfolded the paper, her eyes widening slightly as she read. When she looked up, her expression had transformed from skepticism to genuine interest. 38%, she said quietly. You've been busy. I believe in Pinnacle's potential, I replied, but not under current leadership. Helen refolded the paper, passing it back. Richard has no idea, does he? None, and I'd like to keep it that way until Tuesday. She nodded slowly. What precisely? Are you hoping for from me today? Nothing definitive, just an open mind during Tuesday's meeting. Hear my proposal before making any decisions on Richard's restructuring plan. Helen sipped her water, considering. You understand my position. On the board is to maximize shareholder value. If Richard's plan does that better than yours, it won't, I interrupted. His focus is short-term gains at the expense of long-term stability. My plan preserves jobs, maintains our manufacturing excellence, and expands our market share through targeted innovation. I have the projections to prove it. Helen studied me for a long moment, then smiled. I've always thought you were wasted as an assistant. Very well, Marty. You'll have my attention on Tuesday. That's all I ask, I said, relief washing through me. As we parted outside the cafe, Helen paused. For what it's worth, I voted against your termination when Richard brought it to the executive committee. Experience has value, especially the kind that can't be found on a resume. I watched her walk away, processing this new information. Richard had sought committee approval for my firing? That was unusual, unless... My phone buzzed with a text from Lawrence. Need to see you. Office. ASAP. Lawrence wasn't alone when I arrived at his office. Matthew and Daniel were there, along with a man I didn't recognize, silver-haired, with wire-rimmed glasses and a serious expression. Marty, this is Gregory Walsh, our investigative specialist, Lawrence introduced. We've uncovered something concerning. Gregory nodded. Mrs. Donovan, we've been analyzing Pinnacle's financial records for irregularities as part of our due diligence. There appear to be discrepancies in the company's reported earnings over the past 18 months. What kind of discrepancies? I asked, taking a seat. Creative accounting, he replied, sliding a folder across the table. Revenue inflation, deferred expense reporting, and several questionable transfers to offshore accounts. I opened the folder, scanning the highlighted sections. After decades of reviewing Pinnacle's financial statements, the manipulations were obvious once pointed out. Richard is cooking the books, I said flatly. Lawrence nodded grimly. And based on the patterns, it's not recent. We believe this has been ongoing for at least 2 years, possibly longer. I sat back, processing this revelation. This would explain why he's pushing for the Day One deal. A quick cash injection would cover the shortfalls and mask the accounting issues. Exactly, Daniel confirmed, but it's a temporary fix for a systemic problem. Eventually, the house of cards collapses. My mind raced through implications. How does this affect our strategy for Tuesday? Lawrence leaned forward. It strengthens our position considerably. If we present these findings to the board, Richard's credibility will be destroyed. However, it also creates a public relations challenge for Pinnacle once you take control. We need to get ahead of this, I said firmly. Full disclosure to the board, but carefully managed to prevent a public panic that could tank the stock. Gregory cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Some of these transfers trace back to personal accounts we believe are controlled by Richard himself. If that's confirmed, this moves beyond creative accounting into potential embezzlement, the I. Room fell silent as this sank in. Richard Bennett, the man I'd worked alongside for 25 years, whose reputation was built on business acumen and integrity, might be a criminal. "Have you verified this?" I asked Gregory. "We're still connecting the dots. The accounts are well disguised, layered through multiple shells, but the pattern is consistent with someone siphoning company funds for personal use." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Pinnacle's headquarters dominated the view, its blue glass exterior gleaming in the afternoon sun. "We need absolute certainty before making that accusation," I said finally. "Continue the investigation, but Tuesday's meeting focuses on the accounting, irregularities, not embezzlement allegations." Lawrence nodded. "Agreed. We'll have ironclad financial evidence for the board, plus your alternative business plan. Richard won't have a leg to stand on." As the meeting concluded, Lawrence walked me to the elevator. "Are you all right, Marty? This is a lot to process." I considered his question carefully. "I'm not surprised, actually. There were signs, small inconsistencies in reports, Richard's increasing secrecy about certain accounts. I noticed but dismissed them, thinking it wasn't my place to question." "It's about to become very much your place," Lawrence reminded me. "By this time Tuesday, you'll be in a position to demand answers." That evening, I sat on my porch swing, wrapped in a cardigan against the autumn chill. The financial revelations had shifted something fundamental in my perspective. What had begun as a defensive move to protect Pinnacle from foreign acquisition had evolved into something far more critical. The company I'd helped build for 25 years wasn't just being mismanaged, it was being deliberately undermined by the very person entrusted with its care. The satisfaction of confronting Richard about my ownership stake now seemed secondary to the responsibility of righting a listing ship. My phone rang. Stephanie. "Mom? Just checking in. You've been quiet all weekend." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just finalizing some things for Tuesday." She hesitated. "Do you want me to come with you? For moral support?" The offer touched me deeply. "No need. Lawrence and his team will be there, but thank you." "You'll call me right after? I want to hear everything." "Of course," I promised. "How's Emma after our sleepover?" "Still talking about your pizza dough technique. She says you should open a restaurant next." I laughed. One business venture at a time. After we hung up, I pulled out my notebook again, reviewing my observations about Pinnacle's operations. With fresh eyes, I could now see hints of the financial manipulation scattered throughout. Projects abruptly canceled despite strong performance, unusual budget allocations, Richard's increasing nervousness during quarterly reviews. The pieces had been there all along, but I'd lacked the context to assemble them correctly. Now they formed a damning picture. My doorbell rang, startling me. Through the peephole, I saw Jennifer from Pinnacle, shifting nervously on my porch. "Jennifer," I greeted, opening the door. "This is unexpected." "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, clutching a manila envelope. "I know it's Sunday evening, but I found something while looking for that Peterson contract information. Something that didn't seem right." She held out the envelope. "These were misfiled in your desk. I think they might be important." I took the envelope, opening it, to find several documents, internal memos, bank statements, and a handwritten note in Richard's distinctive scrawl detailing transfer instructions to a numbered account. "Where did you find these?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite my racing heart. "In a false bottom drawer of your old desk." I dropped my pen and was looking for it when I noticed the seam. Jennifer twisted her hands anxiously. "I shouldn't have looked, but when I saw Mr. Bennett's signature on those transfer forms, the amounts don't match our quarterly reports, Mrs. Donovan." Here was the confirmation Gregory had been seeking, delivered by a young woman who had unwittingly stepped Into a corporate minefield. Thank you for bringing these to me, I said carefully. But Jennifer, you should know that giving company documents to a former employee could be problematic for your position. She squared her shoulders. I know. But my father always said integrity matters more than job security. Something's wrong at Pinnacle, and you're the only person there I trust. Her words hit me with unexpected force. After decades of invisibility, this young woman saw me, really saw me, as someone worthy of trust. Come inside, I said, stepping back. We need to talk about what happens next. I settled Jennifer at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, both of us examining the documents she'd brought. The evidence was unmistakable: transfer authorizations, with Richard's signature, redirecting funds that should have gone to operational accounts. How did you notice the discrepancies? I asked, impressed by her perception. Jennifer tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I have an accounting background, actually. The digital marketing experience is what got me hired, but my degree is in finance. When I started trying to reconcile the Peterson account, numbers weren't adding up across departments. I studied her with new appreciation. Richard had hired her for her youth and digital presence, not realizing he was bringing in someone with the exact skills to spot his deception. These past few days have been enlightening, Jennifer continued. Everyone's been in crisis mode since you left. Richard keeps blaming systems and processes, but it's obvious the problem is leadership. Yesterday, he shouted at the entire finance team because they couldn't locate documentation for a major client payment that apparently Marty handled personally. The Westfield account, I guessed. She nodded. How did you know? Because there was never any payment to document. Richard used the Westfield relationship to cover transfers like these. I tapped the papers between us. The missing documentation doesn't exist because the transaction never happened as described. In our books, Jennifer paled. That's outright fraud. Yes, I agreed quietly. And you've just handed me the proof. She wrapped her hands around her mug. What are you going to do with it? Stop him, I said simply. But Jennifer, I need to know what this means for you. Coming here was a risk. Are you prepared for the consequences? She met my gaze steadily. When I took this job, I thought I was joining a respected company with strong values. I can't be part of this deception, no matter what it costs me professionally. I nodded, making a decision. I'm going to share something with you, but it must remain confidential until Tuesday. Over the next 20 minutes, I explained my position as Pinnacle's majority shareholder and the plan to confront Richard at the board meeting. Jennifer listened with widening eyes. So you'll be running Pinnacle? She asked when I finished. Potentially, at least during the transition. The board will ultimately decide on permanent leadership. She shook her head in amazement. Richard has no idea what's coming, does he? No, I confirmed. And I need it to stay that way for less than 48 more hours. Can I count on your discretion? Absolutely. She hesitated. What should I do tomorrow at the office? Exactly what you've been doing. Don't give any indication that anything has changed, but if you notice anything else unusual, text me immediately. After Jennifer left, I called Lawrence, updating him on this new development. He arrived at my house an hour later with Gregory, both men examining the documents with growing excitement. This is the smoking gun, Gregory declared. Combined with our existing evidence, there's no question of impropriety. The board will have no choice but to act. Lawrence nodded, gathering the papers carefully. I'll have these analyzed tonight and incorporated into our presentation. Marty, this changes our approach slightly. We should lead with the financial irregularities before revealing your ownership position. Agreed, I said. The focus needs to be on saving the company, not my personal takeover. After they departed, I tried to sleep but found myself too wired with anticipation. Instead, I spent hours reviewing every aspect of our strategy, considering contingencies, and preparing mentally for what would undoubtedly be the most significant confrontation of my professional life. Monday morning brought an unexpected call. Richard again. "Marty," he began without preamble, "I need you to reconsider my offer. The situation at the office has become untenable." I thought Cynthia was modernizing everything beautifully, I couldn't resist saying. He made a sound of frustration. "This isn't about modernization anymore. Key client relationships are at risk. The Peterson account is threatening to walk. Westfield won't return our calls." "That sounds serious." "It's a temporary disruption," he insisted. "But we need your institutional knowledge to bridge the gap. I've spoken with the board. We're prepared to offer a 6-month consulting contract at twice your previous salary." The desperation in his voice was palpable. Richard Bennett, who had dismissed me without a second thought days ago, was now practically begging for my help. "What prompted this newfound appreciation for my contributions?" I asked. "Don't be difficult. Marty, we both know you were invaluable. I may have underestimated certain aspects of your role." The closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from Richard Bennett. "I'm afraid my schedule still won't permit it," I replied calmly. "But I appreciate the acknowledgement." "For God's sake," he snapped, his facade cracking. "What could possibly be filling your schedule? Garden club meetings? Knitting circles? This is a genuine career opportunity I'm offering you." I closed my eyes, counting to 3 before responding. "Goodbye, Richard. I'll see you at tomorrow's board meeting." "What? Why would you—" I ended the call before he could finish. Less than a minute later, my phone rang again. "Lawrence. Richard just called me in a panic," he said, amusement evident in his voice. "Demanding to know why you mentioned the board meeting." I played dumb and told him I had no idea what he was talking about. "Sorry," I winced. "It slipped out. No harm done." He's rattled but doesn't seem to have connected the dots. If anything, it adds to our advantage. He'll be off balance tomorrow. I spent the rest of Monday finalizing preparations. Lawrence sent over the completed presentation, which I reviewed meticulously. Stephanie stopped by with dinner, sensing my preoccupation. "You're quiet tonight," she observed as we sat at my kitchen table. "Nervous about tomorrow?" "Not nervous exactly," I considered. "More aware of the responsibility. This isn't just about confronting Richard anymore. It's about the future of Pinnacle and everyone who works there." Stephanie reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You've always carried responsibilities others didn't see, Mom. The difference now is that you'll finally get the recognition for it." Her words stayed with me as I laid out my outfit for the morning, not the charcoal suit this time, but a deep burgundy dress with a structured blazer that James had always said brought out the fire in my eyes. Tomorrow wasn't about blending in or playing the supportive role. Tomorrow I will be seen. I barely slept that night. By 5 a.m. I was fully awake, reviewing my notes one final time before showering and dressing with methodical precision. My hands trembled slightly as I fastened my pearl earrings, James's gift that had accompanied me through countless workdays. "Wish me luck," I whispered to his photograph on my dresser. Lawrence called as I was finishing breakfast. "Car service will be at your house in 30 minutes. The team is already setting up in the conference room. Everything's in place." The morning was crisp and clear, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to promise clarity. As the town car approached Pinnacle's headquarters, I felt an unexpected surge of emotion. For 25 years, I'd entered this building as someone else's support system. Today, I would walk in as my own woman. The executive floor was quiet when I arrived, most staff unaware of the drama about to unfold in the boardroom. A few familiar faces looked up in surprise as I passed, whispers following in my wake. Why was Mrs. Donovan back? Hadn't she been let go? Lawrence waited outside the boardroom, his expression serious but encouraging. "Ready?" I nodded, smoothing my blazer. More than ready. Inside, several board members had already gathered, including Helen Bradshaw, who acknowledged me with a subtle nod. The Turner family representative, an elderly gentleman who had known me for decades, looked startled at my presence but offered a friendly wave. At the head of the table, Richard was arranging presentation materials, his back to the door. When he turned and saw me, his expression froze. "Marty, what are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Marcus Stevens, the board chairman, entered. "Ah, Mrs. Donovan, good to see you. Mr. Pierce informed us you had an important matter to present. Today." Richard's head snapped toward Lawrence, then back to me, confusion and the first flickers of alarm crossing his face. "What is this? Martha is no longer with the company. She has no business at a board meeting." Lawrence stepped forward smoothly. "On the contrary, Mrs. Donovan has every right to be here, as the board will soon understand. Chairman Stevens, with your permission, we'd like to amend the agenda to address a matter of urgent concern before Mr. Bennett's presentation." Marcus, intrigued, gestured his approval. "The floor is yours." As the remaining board members filed in, finding their seats around the polished table, I felt a strange calm descend. 25 years of being overlooked, undervalued, and recently discarded had led to this moment. Richard remained standing, color rising in his face. "This is highly irregular. We have a set agenda, which includes a financial overview," Lawrence interrupted. "Mrs. Donovan's presentation is directly relevant to that item." The room quieted as I moved to the head of the table, taking the position Richard had occupied moments before. Our eyes met briefly, his bewildered and increasingly concerned mine, steady and resolved. "Thank you for accommodating this adjustment," I began, addressing the board collectively. "What I'm about to share will significantly impact the decisions before you today." I pressed the button to start the presentation, watching as the first slide appeared on the screen. Financial Irregularities at Pinnacle Industries, a 3-year analysis. Richard's face went ashen. These charts represent Pinnacle's reported quarterly earnings over the past 3 years, I began, gesturing to the screen. The blue line shows the figures presented to this board and our shareholders. The red line shows what our actual performance was, based on internal documentation and reconciled accounts. The two lines diverged dramatically, creating a widening gap that was impossible to ignore. Murmurs spread through the room as board members leaned forward to study the discrepancy. "This is absurd," Richard interrupted, finding his voice. "Where did you get these numbers? They're completely fabricated." I maintained my composure, turning to Lawrence, who distributed folders to each board member. Inside, you'll find supporting documentation for every figure presented, including internal memos, banking records, and transfer authorizations bearing Mr. Bennett's signature. Helen Bradshaw was the first to open her folder, her expression darkening as she scanned the contents. "These appear to be legitimate Pinnacle documents," she noted, looking directly at Richard. "Care to explain the discrepancies, Richard?" "I don't know what you're looking at," he blustered. "But those can't be authentic. This is clearly some kind of revenge ploy by a disgruntled former employee." Marcus Stevens, the board chairman, removed his reading glasses, fixing Richard with a stern gaze. "The documentation appears quite thorough, Richard. Serial numbers, timestamps, your signature on multiple forms." Richard's face flushed. "This is preposterous. Martha was my assistant, not a financial analyst. She has no expertise to make these allegations." "That's where you're wrong," I countered calmly. "My official title was executive assistant, but my actual responsibilities extended far beyond that. I've overseen Pinnacle's operational accounting for 15 years, at your direction." I advanced to the next slide, which detailed specific instances of financial manipulation. Here we see 3 major examples of revenue inflation, where projected earnings were reported as actual income. And here, I continued, advancing again, are 7 instances where expenses were deferred across multiple quarters to artificially boost profitability. The board members exchanged concerned glances as they followed along in their folders. Richard remained standing, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of his chair. "This is a carefully constructed smear campaign," he insisted, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Marty clearly manipulated these documents after her termination." Lawrence stepped forward. "The documents were authenticated by an independent forensic accountant. Their chain of custody is unbroken. Furthermore, Ms. Jennifer Parker, currently employed in your office, has provided a sworn statement regarding additional documents she discovered this weekend." At the mention of Jennifer, Richard's expression shifted from defensive to alarmed. "Jennifer, my new assistant, is involved in this?" "She discovered a false bottom in Marty's former desk," Lawrence explained, "containing these." He held up the manila envelope Jennifer had brought to my home. Richard's face was drained of color. "Those are confidential company documents. They shouldn't leave the premises." "On that we agree," I said. "Which raises the question, why were bank transfer authorizations for non-existent transactions hidden in a secret compartment of my desk?" The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Richard had been hiding incriminating documents in my furniture, creating a potential scapegoat if his schemes were discovered. Helen Bradshaw closed her folder decisively. "I've seen enough to warrant serious concern. Before we go further, I move that we suspend this meeting and convene an emergency audit committee." "I second that motion," the Turner family representative added quickly. "Wait," I said, holding up a hand. "There's more you need to know before you adjourn." Marcus Stevens nodded. "Proceed, Mrs. Donovan." I advanced to a new slide. "This chart shows the destination of funds diverted from Pinnacle's operational accounts. Over $3 million has been transferred to these numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland." The board members' expressions ranged from shock to outrage. Richard began edging toward the door. "Mr. Bennett, please remain seated," Marcus instructed firmly. "We are not finished here." Gregory Walsh, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room, stood and moved to block the exit. "The authorities have been notified of these irregularities," he informed the room. "They've requested that all parties remain available for questioning." Richard sank into a chair, the fight visibly draining from him. "This is a misunderstanding," he insisted weakly. "The transfers were for legitimate business development opportunities, off-book investments that would benefit Pinnacle in the long run. Is that why the accounts trace back to your personal holdings?" I asked quietly. His head snapped up. "You can't prove that." "Actually, we can." Lawrence distributed additional documents. "These records link the numbered accounts to shell companies, registered to Richard Bennett's residential address and personal email." A tense silence fell over the room. Finally, Marcus Stevens cleared his throat. "Richard, in light of these allegations and the supporting evidence, I believe it would be appropriate for you to voluntarily step aside while an investigation proceeds." Richard's expression hardened. "This is my company. I built Pinnacle from nothing. I'm not stepping aside based on fabricated claims from my secretary and some ambulance-chasing lawyer." "It's not your decision anymore," I said, advancing to my final slide. The screen displayed a simple ownership breakdown of Pinnacle Industries stock. Richard Bennett, 12%. Martha Donovan, 38%. Turner family, 9%. Helen Bradshaw, 7%. Other shareholders, 34%. The board members stared at the screen in disbelief, then turned to me with questioning expressions. "This can't be right," Richard sputtered. "Marty doesn't own any Pinnacle stock. She couldn't afford it." Lawrence smiled thinly. "Mrs. Donovan has been systematically acquiring shares through various holding companies for the past 3 years. The transactions were all legal, properly registered, and updated with the SEC. As of last week, she is Pinnacle's majority shareholder." Richard slumped in his chair, the full weight of the situation finally hitting him. "Impossible," he whispered. I moved back to the head of the table, addressing the board directly. I didn't come here seeking vengeance for my termination. I came because I believe in this company and what it can be. For 25 years, I've devoted myself to Pinnacle's success, often working behind the scenes to correct problems before they escalated. I paused, making eye contact with each board member. The financial irregularities I've uncovered are serious, but they don't define what Pinnacle is or could be. We have dedicated employees, loyal clients, and strong fundamentals beneath the accounting manipulation. With proper leadership and transparent governance, we can restore Pinnacle's reputation and secure its future. Helen Bradshaw leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing, Marty? 3 immediate actions, I responded. First, suspend Richard Bennett pending a full investigation. Second, appoint an interim CEO to stabilize operations. Third, establish an independent audit committee to uncover the full extent of the financial misrepresentations and develop a remediation plan. And who would you suggest as interim CEO? Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. I would be willing to serve in that capacity, I offered. I know this company intimately, its operations, its people, its challenges. More importantly, I care deeply about its future. The Turner representative nodded slowly. Given Mrs. Donovan's ownership position and obvious knowledge of the company, I would support that appointment. Helen Bradshaw studied me intently. Running a company is different from supporting its CEO, Marty. Are you prepared for that responsibility? I've essentially been doing it for years, I replied honestly. The difference is that now I'd have the authority to make decisions directly, rather than implementing them through Richard. Richard straightened suddenly. This is nothing but a coup, he spat. You've been planning this for years, haven't you? Playing the dutiful assistant while plotting behind my back? I met his gaze evenly. I began acquiring stock because I believed in Pinnacle's potential. I accelerated those purchases when I discovered you were in talks to sell our manufacturing division to Daewin Enterprises, a move that would have eliminated 200 American jobs while boosting your personal compensation through their stock options package. Several board members turned sharply toward Richard, who flushed deeply. That deal would have benefited all shareholders, he insisted. In the short term, perhaps, I acknowledged. But it would have hollowed out Pinnacle's core competency and destroyed our competitive advantage. It wasn't good business. It was expedient profit-taking at the expense of long-term viability. Marcus Stevens cleared his throat. I believe we have sufficient information to proceed with a vote. Given the serious nature of the financial allegations and Mrs. Donovan's significant ownership stake, I move that we temporarily relieve Richard Bennett of his duties pending investigation and appoint Martha Donovan as interim CEO effective immediately. Second, Helen added promptly. Those in favor? Marcus asked. Hands raised around the table, every member except Richard himself. Motion carried, Marcus declared. Richard, please surrender your company credentials and clear your office by the end of day. Security will escort you. Richard stood slowly, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low. All of you. His gaze fixed on me. Especially you, Marty, this isn't over. As he stormed out, the security team Lawrence had arranged discreetly fell in behind him, ensuring he went directly to his office and nowhere else. When the door closed, the room exhaled collectively. Marcus turned to me. Congratulations, Mrs. Donovan. Or should I say Madam CEO? The word sounded strange, almost dreamlike. For a moment, I struggled to process the reality of what had just occurred. After 25 years of operating in the background, I now stood at the forefront, visible and acknowledged. Thank you, I replied simply. I won't let you down. Helen approached, extending her hand. That was impressively executed, Marty. You've clearly been underestimated for far too long. A common mistake, I agreed, shaking her hand firmly. One I doubt people will make again. As the board members filed out, Lawrence joined me at the table. "How does it feel?" he asked quietly. I looked around the boardroom, the same room where I'd taken notes for countless meetings, always positioned against the wall, never at the table itself. "Surreal," I admitted. "But right." He smiled. "Ready for your first official act as CEO?" I nodded, gathering my materials. "Absolutely. Let's go address the staff. They deserve to know what's happening." As we walked toward the door, I paused, taking one last look at the boardroom from this new perspective. 25 years of invisibility had ended today. The woman who had been dismissed as just an assistant had become the one in charge, and I was ready. As Lawrence and I exited the boardroom, Jennifer was waiting in the hall, her expression a mixture of anxiety and hope. When she saw my slight nod, relief washed over her face. "It's done," I confirmed quietly. "The board voted to remove Richard and appoint me as interim CEO." "Congratulations," she whispered, falling into step beside us. "What happens now?" "Now, we face the most immediate challenge," I replied, "communicating this change to the staff before rumors spread." Lawrence checked his watch. "I've arranged for the executive team to gather in the main conference room in 15 minutes. The all-staff announcement will follow at noon." "Perfect," I agreed, then turned to Jennifer. "Would you prepare the conference room, and please ask IT to set up the video system for the company-wide announcement?" Jennifer nodded, seeming slightly startled at receiving directions from me in this new context. "Right away, Mrs. Donovan." "Marty," I corrected gently. "We're colleagues now, not boss and assistant." As Jennifer hurried away, Lawrence and I continued toward what had been Richard's office, my office now. The space felt different as I crossed the threshold, not as a visitor bringing files or messages, but as its new occupant. Richard's personal items were still scattered across the desk: his fountain pen collection, framed golf photos, the pretentious crystal paperweight shaped like the company logo. The space would need to be completely transformed, but that could. "Wait, I need a moment to collect my thoughts before meeting the executive team," I told Lawrence. "Would you mind giving me the room?" After he left, I moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city skyline. The reality of what had just transpired was beginning to sink in. I, Martha Donovan, divorced grandmother who had spent decades in a support role, was now CEO of a company with over 200 employees and annual revenue exceeding $50 million. The challenge ahead was daunting. Richard's financial manipulations had created a precarious situation that would require careful management to prevent market panic. The overseas investors he'd been courting would need to be addressed. Employees would be anxious about job security once the news broke. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Gregory Walsh entered carrying a file folder. "We've secured Richard's electronic devices and restricted his system access," he reported. "Security is supervising as he clears his personal items. However, there's something else you should know." I turned from the window. "What is it?" "We've been monitoring internal communications since discovering the financial irregularities. In the past hour, several executives have exchanged concerning messages." He handed me the folder, which contained printouts of emails and text messages. As I scanned them, my stomach tightened. 3 senior executives, all handpicked by Richard, were discussing contingency plans and loyalty to real leadership. "They're planning resistance," I concluded, looking up at Gregory. He nodded grimly. "It appears so. James Harrington in manufacturing, Philip Conrad in sales, and Lisa Westmore in marketing, all communicating about standing firm against what they're calling a hostile takeover." I expected some pushback, I admitted. Richard cultivated fierce personal loyalty among his inner circle. But we need to address this immediately before it undermines the transition. Gregory agreed. "I suggest adding this to your executive team agenda. Confront it directly." "Thank you, Gregory. Please keep monitoring the situation." After he left, I sat at the desk, my desk now, and quickly outlined talking points for the upcoming meetings. The executive team would require directness and authority. The all-staff announcement would need to balance honesty about our challenges with confidence in our path forward. At precisely 11 a.m., I entered the main conference room where the executive team had assembled. 12 people sat around the table, their expressions ranging from confusion to open hostility. James Harrington, a burly man with a permanent scowl who headed manufacturing, was notably checking his watch with exaggerated impatience. "Thank you all for gathering on short notice," I began, taking the seat at the head of the table. Richard's former position. "I'm sure you've heard rumors about this morning's board meeting." "Where's Richard?" Lisa Westmore interrupted sharply. As marketing director, she had been one of Richard's most vocal supporters, and one of the few who had openly approved of my termination last week. "That's why we're here," I replied calmly. "The board has removed Richard Bennett as CEO, effective immediately. I've been appointed interim CEO while a formal executive search is conducted." The reaction was instantaneous. Philip Conrad, our silver-haired sales director, actually laughed. "You, Richard's secretary, running Pinnacle? This has to be a joke." I maintained my composure. "I understand this comes as a shock. However, there are serious matters you need to be aware of before you form judgments." Lawrence distributed folders similar to those the board had received, though with some sensitive details redacted. These documents outline financial irregularities discovered in Pinnacle's accounting. The board determined that leadership change was necessary while these issues are investigated. As the executives flipped through the materials, the atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. Expressions of dismissal gave way to concern, then alarm. "These are forgeries," James Harrington insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Richard would never—" "The documentation has been authenticated," I interrupted firmly. "Furthermore, I should clarify my position. While my title was executive assistant, I've effectively been running Pinnacle's day-to-day operations for years, while Richard focused on external relationships. More importantly," I paused, meeting each pair of eyes around the table, "I am now Pinnacle's majority shareholder." The room fell silent. Finally, our CFO, Dorothy Chen, who had always treated me with professional respect, spoke up. "These financial discrepancies, how bad is it, Marty?" I appreciated her directness. "Significant enough to warrant immediate action, but not insurmountable if we act decisively. The company's fundamentals remain strong. Our products are excellent. Our client relationships solid. But we've been operating under false financial reporting, and that stops today." "What does this mean for our divisions?" asked Robert Wilson, the technology director who had joined Pinnacle only 6 months ago. "In the short term, minimal disruption," I assured him. "Our priority is stabilizing operations while conducting a thorough financial review. I'll be meeting with each of you individually over the next few days to discuss specifics." Lisa Westmore leaned forward, her expression still skeptical. "And the Daewin deal? Richard said it was nearly finalized." "That deal is off the table," I stated firmly. "It would have gutted our manufacturing capacity and eliminated American jobs for short-term financial gain." James Harrington's face reddened. "That deal was going to revolutionize our production capabilities. We need Daewin's technology." "What we need," I countered, "is to leverage our existing expertise while investing strategically in our own technological development. Selling off our core strength is not the answer." I could see the division forming already, those willing to consider new leadership versus those stubbornly loyal to Richard. This transition would not be smooth, but I hadn't expected it to be. "Understand this is a lot to process," I acknowledged. "Some of you have worked closely with Richard for years. Your loyalty is admirable, but right now, Pinnacle needs your expertise and commitment more than ever." Dorothy Chen nodded. "What do you need from us today, Marty?" "Your presence and support at the all-staff announcement at noon. Questions will be flying," and employees will look to you for cues. If you project unity and confidence, it will help stabilize an uncertain situation. Lisa Westmore stood abruptly. I need to speak with Richard before committing to anything further. Richard is no longer with the company, I reminded her. Your obligation is to Pinnacle and its employees, not to a former CEO who deliberately manipulated financial reports. She hesitated, clearly torn. Philip Conrad placed a hand on her arm, murmuring something I couldn't hear, and she reluctantly sat back down. I'm not asking for blind loyalty, I continued. Judge me by my actions and decisions in the coming weeks. But right now, we need to present a unified front to prevent unnecessary panic among staff and clients. After fielding additional questions about immediate priorities and transition plans, I ended the meeting with 15 minutes to prepare for the all-staff announcement. Most of the executives filed out quietly, processing the morning's revelations. James Harrington and Lisa Westmore huddled near the door, exchanging whispered comments, while Dorothy Chen approached me directly. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I suspected something was off with our quarterly numbers for some time. Richard always had explanations that technically made sense, but never felt right. I nodded. We'll need your financial expertise more than ever in the coming weeks, Dorothy. You'll have it, she promised. And Marty, it's about time someone recognized what you've been doing here all along. Her words bolstered my confidence as I prepared to address the entire company. At noon precisely, I stood before a camera in the main conference room. My image broadcast to screens throughout the building and to remote employees via video conference. Taking a deep breath, I faced the camera. Good afternoon. For those who don't know me well, I'm Martha Donovan. Until recently, I served as executive assistant to Richard Bennett for 25 years. Today, I'm speaking to you as Pinnacle's interim CEO. I paused, letting the revelation sink in before continuing. This morning, the board made the difficult but necessary decision to replace Mr. Bennett due to significant concerns about financial reporting practices. I want to be transparent with you about what this means for Pinnacle and for each of you. As I outlined the situation, emphasizing the company's underlying strength while acknowledging the challenges ahead, I could see uncertainty in the faces of those gathered in the conference room, but I also noticed something else. Glimmers of hope, particularly from longtime employees who had worked alongside me for years. Change can be unsettling, I concluded, but it also brings opportunity. I believe in Pinnacle's potential and in the talent and dedication of everyone here. My door is open, and in the coming days, I'll be reaching out to teams across the company to hear your insights and concerns. Together, we will chart a course forward that honors what makes this company special while addressing the issues that have held us back. As the broadcast ended, Jennifer approached with a stack of messages. Your daughter called twice, and there are already reporters calling for comments on Richard's departure. I nodded, suddenly aware of the weight of responsibility I'd taken on. Schedule a press briefing for tomorrow morning, and please call Stephanie back. Tell her I'll see her for dinner tonight. The remainder of the day passed in a whirlwind of meetings and decisions. By late afternoon, I finally had a moment to sit alone in my new office, contemplating the dramatic turn my life had taken in just 1 week, from terminated employee to company leader. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Tom, the security guard who had escorted me out just days ago. Mrs. Donovan, ma'am, he stammered, clearly unsure how to address me now. We've finished clearing Mr. Bennett's personal items, and, well, the staff wanted me to give you this. He handed me a small plant, a peace lily in a ceramic pot. Attached was a card signed by dozens of employees, bearing a simple message. Welcome. Back. We're glad you're here. The unexpected gesture brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Tom. This means a great deal to me. As he left, I placed the plant on the windowsill, a symbol of new beginnings in a space that would soon become truly mine. The journey ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in decades, I was charting my own course. Martha Donovan, CEO of Pinnacle Industries. The title still felt foreign, but increasingly right. 3 months passed in a blur of 18-hour days, difficult decisions, and gradual transformation. The financial investigation had revealed even deeper problems than initially suspected. Richard's creative accounting stretched back nearly 4 years, leaving Pinnacle in a precarious position. That required immediate decisive action. The first 6 weeks had been the most challenging. I'd spent countless late nights with Dorothy Chen and her finance team, meticulously reconstructing accurate financial records and developing a transparent reporting framework. The day we submitted our restated earnings to the SEC had been nerve-wracking, but the relief that followed was indescribable, like finally lancing a wound that had been festering for years. Clients had been understandably concerned when news of financial irregularities broke. I'd personally called our top 20 accounts, many of whom I'd interacted with for years as Richard's assistant. Their surprise at my new role quickly gave way to appreciation for the direct communication. Most stayed, comforted by the honesty and detailed recovery plans I presented. The manufacturing division that Richard had been so eager to sell off proved to be our greatest asset during the recovery. Under new leadership, a talented floor manager I'd promoted after James Harrington's departure, they had implemented efficiency measures that significantly reduced costs while maintaining our quality standards. When I toured the facility last week, workers who had once averted their eyes when executives visited now approached me directly with ideas and suggestions. I sat at my desk, fully redecorated now with family photos, a comfortable ergonomic chair, and not a single item from Richard's tenure, reviewing the quarterly results we would announce the following day. The space felt completely mine now, with walls repainted in a warm sage green instead of Richard's stark white, and bookshelves filled with business volumes I'd collected over the years but never displayed. Dorothy Chen sat across from me, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. "These numbers are solid," she confirmed, tapping the report. "Completely transparent, conservatively stated, and still showing 4% growth despite the restructuring costs. The market will respond positively." "Let's hope so," I replied, scanning the final page. "We've come a long way in 90 days, but we still have ground to recover." Dorothy nodded. "True, but consider where we started. When the truth about Richard's accounting emerged, many predicted bankruptcy within 6 months. Instead, we've stabilized operations, retained 95% of our client base, and implemented cost-saving measures without a single layoff." She was right, of course. The journey had been grueling but ultimately successful. We'd renegotiated supplier contracts, streamlined internal processes, and invested strategically in technology upgrades that would pay dividends for years to come. Most importantly, we'd restored trust with clients, shareholders, and employees. "The board meeting tomorrow should be interesting," I mused, closing the report. "They'll need to decide whether to extend my interim appointment or proceed with the executive search." Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "Is there still any question about their decision? You've accomplished more in 3 months than Richard did in his last 3 years." "Politics is never simple," I reminded her. "Some board members may still prefer a CEO with traditional credentials." My phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. 6 p.m. reservation confirmed. Emma insists on wearing her business suit to dinner with CEO Grandma. I smiled, typing back, "Looking forward to it. Tell her professional attire is always appreciated." Dorothy stood to leave. "For what it's worth, this company would be foolish to let you go now. The staff would revolt." After she left, I walked to the window, reflecting on the tumultuous journey of the past few months. The executive team had eventually stabilized after initial resistance. James Harrington had resigned 2 weeks after my appointment, unwilling to adapt to new leadership. Lisa Westmore had surprised everyone by becoming one of my strongest supporters once she witnessed my management approach firsthand. That transformation had occurred during our crisis response to the Peterson account, when they threatened to pull their business, a potential $3 million loss. Lisa had expected me to panic or make desperate concessions. Instead, I'd calmly arranged a meeting with Mr. Peterson himself, a relationship I'd quietly nurtured for years. Over lunch at his favorite steakhouse, I'd laid out our situation with complete transparency, acknowledged past missteps under previous leadership, and presented our corrective action plan. He'd not only agreed to stay but had increased their order volume by 15% the following month. "I always knew you were the one really running things," he'd told me as we shook hands. Bennett just took the credit. That evening, Lisa appeared in my office doorway. "I misjudged you," she'd admitted, "and I misjudged what leadership should look like." Since then, she'd become an invaluable ally in reshaping our corporate culture. Jennifer had blossomed in her expanded role, combining her digital expertise with a growing understanding of operations. Richard's plan to modernize certain processes had actually been sound. It was his secretive execution and financial manipulation that had been problematic. We were implementing many of those digital initiatives, but with transparent oversight and proper investment. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Lawrence entered, briefcase in hand. "The final settlement with Richard is ready for your review," he announced, placing documents on my desk. "He's agreed to all terms, including the 5-year non-compete clause and full repayment of misappropriated funds." "He actually signed?" I asked, surprised. Richard had been fighting the settlement for weeks. Lawrence nodded. The prospect of criminal charges became quite persuasive. This agreement allows him to avoid prosecution while making financial restitution. I examined the signature page, where Richard's once confident scrawl now appeared shaky and diminished. "Has he found a new position?" "Consulting work, I believe. Nothing comparable to what he had here." Lawrence hesitated. "He asked about you, actually. Wanted to know if you were managing to keep the lights on." I laughed softly. Still underestimating me, even now. "There's something else," Lawrence added, pulling another document from his briefcase. 2 weeks ago, Richard approached 3 former board members about funding a competitive venture. They declined and informed the current board leadership. I skimmed the report Lawrence handed me, noting how meticulous Richard had been in outlining a business that would directly target Pinnacle's core market, with himself at the helm, naturally. The non-compete clause couldn't be more timely. Observed. Indeed. Though what's most telling is how thoroughly the potential investors rejected his pitch. One wrote that he couldn't risk associating with Bennett's questionable ethics. "Your transparency during this crisis has earned you significant goodwill in the business community, while Richard has become something of a pariah." The knowledge brought no satisfaction, only a sense of justice finally being served. Richard was experiencing the consequences of his own actions, just as I was reaping the rewards of decades of integrity and diligence. "Some people never learn," Lawrence agreed. "Speaking of which, are you prepared for tomorrow's board evaluation?" "As prepared as I can be. The results speak for themselves, but ultimately, it's their decision." Lawrence studied me thoughtfully. "You know, when we started this journey, your goal was simply to prevent the day one sale and protect Pinnacle's employees. You never mentioned wanting to run the company permanently." "Things change," I acknowledged. "I discovered I'm good at this better than I expected. More importantly, I enjoy it. After decades of implementing someone else's vision, shaping my own is remarkably satisfying." "Well, for what it's worth, my money's on you remaining in that chair for as long as you want it." The following morning, I dressed with particular care. A tailored navy suit with subtle pinstripes, my pearl earrings for good luck, and a silk scarf in Pinnacle's corporate blue. Today wasn't just about the quarterly results or even my performance review. It was about claiming my rightful place after a lifetime of standing in the shadows. The board meeting began at 9 a.m. sharp. Marcus Stevens welcomed everyone, then turned to me for the quarterly presentation. For the next 45 minutes, I walked the board through our financial recovery, operational improvements, and strategic vision for Pinnacle's future. In conclusion, I finished, displaying the final slide. We've not only stabilized Pinnacle following the accounting irregularities, but positioned it for sustainable growth moving forward. The path hasn't been easy, but with continued disciplined execution, we expect to exceed pre-crisis performance levels within 2 quarters. Helen Bradshaw was the first to speak after I concluded. Impressive work, Marty. You've managed to navigate an extraordinarily difficult situation with remarkable skill. Other board members nodded in agreement, even those who had initially been skeptical of my appointment. Marcus cleared his throat. Which brings us to our next agenda item. As you know, Marty's interim CEO appointment was for an initial 3-month period, which concludes today. We need to determine next steps regarding permanent leadership. I closed my presentation materials, preparing to leave the room for their deliberation. Actually, Marcus continued, the board has already conducted its evaluation and reached a decision. We see no reason to prolong uncertainty. Martha, we would like to offer you the position of permanent CEO of Pinnacle Industries, effective immediately. Though I had hoped for this outcome, hearing the words spoken officially sent a wave of emotion through me. Thank you for your confidence, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I would be honored to accept. The Turner representative smiled broadly. It's hardly a difficult decision. The company is thriving under your leadership, and your ownership stake makes you singularly invested in Pinnacle's long-term success. Helen Bradshaw leaned forward. I should mention that we did conduct due diligence. An executive search firm discreetly evaluated external candidates, including several with impressive credentials from Fortune 500 companies. I hadn't known about this external search and felt a momentary flicker of uncertainty. None compared favorably to you, Helen continued. Your institutional knowledge combined with your fresh perspective as CEO created a unique skill set that outside candidates couldn't match. The fact that you've never been a CEO before has proven to be an advantage. You're not bound by outdated leadership conventions or ego. Marcus nodded in agreement. You've approached this role with humility and intelligence. You know what you know, you acknowledge what you don't, and you build teams to fill those gaps. That's true leadership. Their words touched me deeply, not just the vote of confidence, but the recognition of qualities I'd cultivated quietly for decades, never expecting them to be seen or valued at this level. We'll need to formalize compensation and terms, Marcus added, but consider this official. Congratulations, Marty. After concluding remaining business, the meeting adjourned. As board members filtered out, offering congratulations, Helen lingered behind. You know what I find most remarkable about all this? She asked. Not the financial turnaround, impressive as it is. It's how you've transformed the culture here in just 3 months. People are engaged, collaborative, innovative again. That's been intentional, I acknowledged. Financial stability means nothing without the right people feeling valued and empowered. Helen nodded. Well, whatever you're doing, keep it up. I haven't seen Pinnacle this energized in years. After she left, I remained alone in the boardroom, allowing myself a moment to savor the milestone. From fired assistant to permanent CEO in just over 3 months, a journey even I couldn't have imagined when Richard had callously dismissed me after 25 years of service. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. Well? I smiled. Typing back, it's official, permanent CEO. Her response was immediate. Yes! Champagne tonight. So proud of you, Mom. I slipped my phone into my pocket and gathered my materials, ready to share the news with the executive team waiting. In my office, As I walked the corridor toward what was now officially my permanent domain, I passed the desk where I had sat for 25 years. Jennifer now occupied that space. Though the role had been significantly redefined, she looked up as I passed. "How did it go?" "Very well," I replied with a smile. "They've made the appointment permanent." Jennifer beamed. "Congratulations! That's wonderful news." "Thank you. Would you do me a favor and schedule an all-staff announcement for 2 p.m.? I'd like to share this with everyone personally." As I continued to my office, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past few months. Richard's attempt to discard me had instead catalyzed my transformation from background supporter to acknowledged leader. His underestimation of my capabilities, knowledge, and determination had proven to be his most consequential mistake. Later that afternoon, I stood before the assembled staff in our main atrium. Faces both familiar and new looked back at me. Some, who had known me for decades as Richard's assistant, others who had only known me as the interim CEO who had steadied the company during crisis. 3 months ago, I began, I stood before you during a time of uncertainty and promised transparency, decisive action, and a commitment to Pinnacle's core values. Today, I'm pleased to share that the board has appointed me as your permanent CEO. Applause erupted, surprisingly enthusiastic and widespread. I waited for it to subside before continuing. When I joined Pinnacle 25 years ago, I never imagined standing here in this capacity. Like many of you, I contributed to our success from positions that weren't always visible or celebrated. That experience shapes my leadership today and my vision for our future. I paused, making eye contact with employees throughout the room. In my first months as CEO, I've had the privilege of learning about your work, your challenges, and your ideas. I've been impressed by your resilience and commitment during difficult times. Moving forward, I want to foster a culture where everyone's contributions are recognized and valued, where innovative thinking is encouraged at every level, and where we succeed not despite our challenges, but because of how we overcome them together. As I outlined our strategic priorities for the coming year, I noticed Dorothy Chen standing near the back, giving me a subtle thumbs up. Beside her was Jennifer, nodding along with my points about digital transformation. Even Tom, the security guard who had once escorted me out of the building, stood proudly at his post, a smile on his face. In closing, I said, I want to thank each of you for your trust and support during this transition. The title may say Chief Executive Officer, but our success has been and will continue to be a collective achievement. I'm honored to lead Pinnacle into its next chapter, and I look forward to what we'll accomplish together. That evening, celebrating with Stephanie and my grandchildren at our favorite restaurant, I felt a profound sense of completion. Emma proudly wore her business suit, a charming blazer over a frilly dress, and peppered me with questions about being a boss lady. "Grandma," she asked seriously, "are you the most important person at your company now?" I smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. "No, sweetheart. I'm just the one who makes sure everyone else can do their important work. That's what leadership really means." Stephanie raised her glass. "To Mom, who taught us all that it's never too late to step into your power." My youngest grandchild, 6-year-old Tyler, looked up from his coloring. "Grandma, are you famous now? Joey at school said his dad read about you in the newspaper." It was true. There had been articles about Pinnacle's turnaround and my unusual path to leadership. The business press had initially focused on the novelty, from assistant to CEO, the secretary who bought the company. More recent coverage had shifted to our financial recovery and innovative management approach. "Not famous," I explained gently. "Just doing something different than what people expected." "Like when I did a cartwheel at the ballet recital instead of a curtsy?" asked 9-year-old Sophie. We all laughed, and I squeezed her hand. "Exactly like that, though perhaps with slightly less shocked teachers." As we finished our desserts, I noticed a familiar figure at a corner table, Jennifer. dining with friends. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me a discreet thumbs up. I smiled in return, reminded of how connections formed in professional settings often transcended conventional boundaries. She had risked her new job to do what was right, and I'd never forget that courage. As we clinked glasses, I thought about Richard Bennett, who had dismissed me so casually after 25 years. His greatest mistake wasn't the financial manipulation or even the embezzlement. It was failing to recognize the value of the woman who had quietly kept his company running all those years. I had never sought revenge, only justice and the opportunity to preserve what I'd helped build. Yet there was a certain poetic symmetry to how events had unfolded, the assistant becoming the executive, the overlooked becoming the celebrated, the discarded becoming the essential. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Stephanie asked, noticing my momentary distraction. I smiled, returning to the present moment, to family, celebration, and the future stretching bright before us. "Just about how life comes full circle sometimes," I replied, "and how the ending isn't always what you expect." 1 year later, I stood at the podium in Pinnacle's newly expanded headquarters, cutting the ribbon on our Innovation Center, a collaborative workspace where employees from all departments could develop new product ideas and process improvements. The facility embodied the philosophy I'd worked to instill. Everyone has valuable contributions to make, regardless of title or position. Beside me stood Dorothy Chen, recently promoted to COO, and Jennifer Parker, now our Director of Digital Strategy. The company had grown by 22% under our leadership. But more importantly, we'd built a culture of transparency, collaboration, and genuine respect. As employees applauded and cameras flashed, I spotted a small news item on the monitor in the reception area, a business ticker reporting that Richard Bennett had filed for personal bankruptcy following failed ventures and mounting legal expenses. I felt no satisfaction at his downfall, only a renewed appreciation for the path that had brought me here. His attempt to discard me had become the catalyst for my greatest professional achievement and personal growth. Later that afternoon, as I mentored a group of young female employees in our leadership development program, one asked what advice I would give to women feeling undervalued in their organizations. I considered the question carefully before answering. Know your worth, even when others don't recognize it. Document your contributions. Build financial independence, whenever possible. And remember that sometimes, the person who underestimates you is giving you the greatest gift of all, the freedom to surprise them and yourself. As I looked at their eager faces, I saw my own journey reflected back. Not just the dramatic confrontation in the boardroom, but the decades of diligent work, careful observation, and quiet competence that had prepared me for that moment. The bitter winds of dismissal had ultimately carried me to where I truly belonged, not in someone else's shadow, but in the full light of my own capability, leading the company I had helped build, on my own terms, at last. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.